Thank you for logging in tonight to Hidden Histories, URBAN-15's monthly cultural magazine streaming live from San Antonio, Texas. I am your host tonight, George Cisneros, and I welcome this opportunity to give you a taste of what San Antonio is about. The show itself is a gift from our community to URBAN-15 because everything in this show is created and developed and nurtured by people here in San Antonio, Texas. Tonight, we're going to be featuring the music of composer Cenobio Hernandez, who came to San Antonio in 1922, who passed in 1950, but has left us a deep legacy and a deep tradition of outstanding musical compositions. We are honored tonight that Cenobio Hernandez's grandson, Ricky Hernandez, is with us, who will give us a presentation, an analysis, and great performances of his grandfather's music. We'll start the evening tonight with Recuerdos. One of the most exciting things about working on this project is finding things in amazing places. Every week and every episode, we're going to have a thing called found footage found pictures. And right now at this part of the program, we've had a tease of what's about to come for the rest of the evening. But we'd like to jump to the found footage section. And this is some black and white footage we found that was shot here in 1922. And we'll proceed with that for a moment of Hidden Histories. Well, that was 16 millimeter black and white film that we retrieved through the National Archives, and it was unlabeled. Went to Washington, and we were able to get it and transfer to digital. But that's the tease. If you people have any images, footage, 8mm, Super 8, old VHS, whatever you have, contacted us through Find Us at hiddenhistories.tv. All day we've been getting pictures from people of those wonderful sepia images of people walking on Houston Street during the 30s and 40s. So that's what we'll be doing in the next few weeks. So let's get to the main part of our show now. We just heard music from, that music was Cenobio Hernandez's music called Alegría. And Ricky, you're here representing a long lineage of musicianship.
Yeah, that piece was called Alegría, and I recorded that about 2001. It was one of about 32 polkas that my grandfather composed, and I found this music in a box like that right over there. In fact, that is the box at my grandmother's house. The box was in her closet, and as a little boy, I would hear about my grandfather's music. Of course, when I was a little boy, I didn't care too much about it. You know, I was playing music, and I was playing rock and roll and blues, and then at some point, I just went to go find it. I pulled it out, and there was all this beautiful music. That first song I played is called Recuerdos, Memories, and my grandfather wrote it for my grandmother. That was there in that box. That song was, and along a whole case full of music came out of there.
Well, this is an interesting story because here's a man who was born in the 1860s. He was a successful musician in Mexico. He had a famous orchestra there, and can you give us a little bit of background of how he came to San Antonio?
Well, he was born in 1863 in San Luis Potosí, Mexico, and he played the cello, the bajo sexto, which is the 12-string, Mexican 12-string guitar. He also played the bass, and he learned to compose when he was in San Luis Potosí. While he was there in Mexico, his family, which were all musicians, were working around there locally. By that time, they were in San Pedro Las Colonias, another small town in Mexico. And this gentleman named Cenobio Hernandez Charles, he played French horn in the symphony. And
now, tell us which symphony.
Well, it was the San Antonio Symphony, actually. Thank you. And and so he went to Mexico, and like all musicians, when you go into a town, you go looking for other musicians that he was playing. He saw he met my family, my grandfather's family, and he fell in love with them, and he thought they were just so talented. He said, "You need to come to San Antonio. There's lots of work there for you." And my grandfather's thinking, "Well, I don't know if we should go." They don't know. Meanwhile, the Mexican Revolution is happening at that time. And that was enough for them to convince to go ahead and let's take the chance and go to San Antonio. So it was because of this gentleman that the family made the move. So when they got here to San Antonio, he introduced them to other people, and the next thing you know, they're playing in for the silent movies and the orchestra pits. My grandfather didn't play for the symphony, but he played for the silent movies with all the great musicians that were in there.
There were a number of chamber orchestras that played for the silent movies, and I do know that one of the more famous conductors was the grandfather of Becky Barrera, who, a really amazing person here in San Antonio. And she showed me a picture of the palace, and there was the Plaza, the Maya, where her grandfather was the conductor. And so we have this long tradition of the silent movies becoming a place where highly trained musicians.
Yeah, they were serious players. Serious
players. I know in our neighborhood, we had Ortiz, Cepeda, your grandfather, all within a 5-block circle of where I was raised. And so San Antonio was a very magnet for creativity and culture during that period.
One of the things too and I'm not sure if because you and I were talking about this, there was some racism involved, and so it was hard for some of the Mexicans who came across to get work, but which really said a lot for my grandfather, because he and his brother, who was an accomplished clarinetist, were working all the time, and everybody was hiring them. So through the 20s, everybody was doing great. But then when the talkies came in, all the musicians, or a lot of them, lost their work, lost their jobs. And of course, when the Depression hit, by that time, my grandfather had a nice sized family. I think there were about 7 or 8 of them, of the children. And so they had to go and work in the fields because there was no work for the musicians after being successful in the 20s. So it was a very humbling experience for them. One of the stories was that the gentleman who brought my grandfather over, Don Everardo, who played for the symphony, and a lot of people the symphony was going through changes too. They offered him a job at the quarry because they were offering musicians, they was looking for work. They said, "We have work for you here at the quarry, but it's sweeping." And here was this gentleman who played Beethoven and all this, all this great music, and he said, "No, I'll wait it out." So they all took to the fields, and they went and picked apples and beets and cotton and everything else. But the people that hired my grandfather loved them because they brought their instruments with them, and at night they'd pull out the polkas and valses and everything else. So it was.
Well, the pictures we have of your grandfather's family there on Travis Street, there's like 7 or 8 children in there, and they were all musicians as well?
Well, not all of them. There was Andres, who's the oldest one. He didn't play, but Alfredo played the trombone. My father played the bass. He worked part-time. In fact, out of the family, the other ones were full-time players, and my father was the part-time player. So when I wanted to play music, he didn't want me to play because he knew how difficult it was going to be for me. So my Uncle Rudy played the trombone in the Army band, and he also played the cello and the bass, and he played with a lot of the orchestras, Felix Solis, Ramiro Cervera, and Paul Elizondo, and also with the small symphonies that played around town. Ramiro played the taxi dances that they used to have downtown, and Ramiro was a great violinist. Chavela was a wonderful pianist, and then Lolita was the youngest, and she died very young. She died on Christmas Eve at about 12 or 13 years old. But when they had to go, as they were growing up and they were struggling, the whole family worked to keep money coming in, even as they were adults. And when World War II came in, my Uncle Rudy, my Uncle Landy, and my father went out. They went to Europe, and they fought in the war over there. And one thing about this is that my grandfather, in 1922, he was already 59 in 22.
When he first came over, he was
Yes.
59 years old.
Yeah, they came about 1920. So by the war, that's 59, 69, 79, 1942, he was already approaching 80. And he worked as a copyist for several publishers, and I'm not sure which ones, but I know there were several in town at the time. And he was a copyist, and was a teacher. So he gave lessons and so forth.
Well, the thing is that obviously he was obsessed with writing, because you've told me how many pieces of music he wrote in his life. And is there anything that anything more remarkable than a man who would come up with music in his head and be able to just notate it without even sitting at a keyboard? That was one of the remarkable things you said about it. But you've mentioned already just how much music he wrote in his lifetime.
Well, what is amazing is that he wrote 42 waltzes, 32 polkas, 3 one-step pieces, a schottische, 1 march, 1 danzón, 2 danzas, and 2 concerti for cello and piano, with 1 being arranged for orchestra. And he wrote all this music from 1942 to about 1949, the last 10 years of his life. He's an old man. And I don't know if you can see his notation, but this piece right here is the orchestra part. He orchestrated the whole thing. This is a cello concerto for cello and orchestra. He arranged everything, and we have all of the music. Obviously, these are copies, but it's 81 pages. You imagine sitting down.
81 pages.
and so it's amazing. So he did this, and he would write his ideas down on paper bags when he didn't have manuscript paper. So if he was out somewhere or at the house and he didn't have manuscript paper, they'd pull out a paper bag and he'd write it out on pencil.
Well, that's pretty amazing because the images on the screen show the front side, outside cover of a paper bag, and it's probably handy because they live right there in Travis and Picoso, which is walking distance to Elmendorf Lake. And on the flip side, you see a concerto. Yeah. I mean, this is a pretty amazing piece of San Antonio history that we're discussing.
And my Aunt Chavela has stories that, and I don't know if it's legend or whatever, but they said that he would be out there if he was on the bus or something like that he would write some ideas down on his forearm, just to sketch out a melody.
Or his shirt or something?
Yeah, well, that was the other thing. He would write it on his skin just to keep the notes. But then my aunt said that one day she would be washing his clothes, and on his white shirt there'd be lines with notes. So if you can imagine him getting an idea and writing maybe 5 notes, like a motif, because how much can you write? Maybe 5 notes to get the idea, and then write this whole thing out.
Well,
it's amazing.
You did a remarkable thing. You found the box. You found what the value of what was in there. I keep thinking of how many boxes were out there on the west side, south in the valley, East Texas. There must be boxes of wealth of music that people have written. So, it's very frightening when you go to a garage sale and you open something and you find sheet music, or you find a drawing and the family's selling it for a nickel because they're really selling the box, not what's in it.
Right.
So I think this is what the concept of hidden histories is all about, is that you never know where you're going to find who we are as a people, as a community. One
of the things I wanted to didn't mention was one of the songs he wrote. He would write for everybody. My parents had a child, my first oldest sister, so he'd write a waltz and put her name on it. And then we had another sister was born, and he wrote a waltz for her and put her name on it. And then people in Bay City, Texas, that were very close, he would write songs for people, pieces, compositions. And we have a piece called Rosario, which is a beautiful valse that he wrote for piano. And a friend of ours, my brother's in Denton, his name is David Pierce, and he put together an orchestra. He loved the music so much that he put an orchestra together to do a concert that my brother and I participated in. So we have that, and we've never heard, before this, we've never heard it with an orchestra or strings.
But you were telling me a little twist on this was that he was going through your family pictures, and his orchestration is based upon the orchestra in the family pictures. And so all the instrumentation is as authentic as possible to what it was in here.
And so he might have added a couple of extra players to whatever those people were.
Well, can we get a hit of that, if you don't mind?
Rosario?
Rosario?
Let's see if we have it. go to my grandmother's on Travis. He had already died, but they would pull out his charts and play the music. And that's the way it sounded to me as a little boy.
Okay, now that's just an expert, but for whom was this one written?
Rosario, my sister. In fact, she's here tonight. I'm glad she made it. She's back there. And he wrote for everybody. Like I said, just a mass amount of music.
You know, well, we've been blabbing a lot, and the audience, I'm sure, is we're not all musicologists, music history. And would you mind, like, just going back to the piano and playing for us another of your grandfather's tunes?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
And which cousin, daughter, or family member is this dedicated to?
This is a song called Hortensia. And he wrote this for my cousin in Bay City. And this is it.
The thing that amazes me about that particular piece, besides written for a family member, it was just always that must have been a great birthday gift or a great Christmas gift for Hernandez, is the architecture. This guy has an architectural form that's almost symphonic. It's definitely sonata forms, and the way he makes those and repetitions and builds them up. That's pretty sophisticated stuff for coming out of San Luis Potosí. But especially. And where do you think he got his formal?
They said the European influence had a big thing to do with that, because they came into Mexico. It was the Germans, the French, and the Spanish, of course, and everybody was influenced by all the music was influenced by that. European styles, and so like the first verse would happen, and then there was a repeat of that verse. Then it goes to the second verse, and it repeats the second verse, and then it goes back to the first verse. And then from the first verse, it goes to what they call a trio, which was the third section, and then the fourth section, and then it goes back to the first verse. And so that's the way Mozart did his sonatas. And Clemente did sonatinas, and even Scott Joplin. I looked at his books, and The Entertainer, it's like A, repeat A, B, repeat B, go back to A, and then go back to the third part. I mean, so this is how he was writing, which was the way everybody did it. And it's just great to be able to know that, I don't know how he...
one of the things I've read is that was pretty much the typical composer form until Tin Pan Alley. And during Tin Pan Alley, a 78 record could only have 200 grooves in it for the technology of the time. So they had to go and change the form of the song. So at 78 RPMs with only 200 grooves, you had to shorten the form. Right. And you got rid of the repetitions. So in some ways, technology stifled paper. It's kind of an interesting concept. I have been doing some research right now on the early recording studios in San Antonio, and in a much later part of Hidden History, we're gonna explore that one-sided records that were made here.
There's been a lot of great musicians that have come from San Antonio, and like you said earlier at the very beginning about riding the shoulders of those who came before us. I mean, it's just our parents and our grandparents, and now all the north side bands, the south side and west side bands.
I mean, the thing is also that as each generation grows, we embrace the new forms and new technologies and the new styles. It's obvious that this man, changes of tempo, the form senses, it was built around his ability to react to the silent films or perhaps to the dance crowd that he was performing for, because the emotional ups and downs of that piece is pretty incredible.
And one thing about the piece is that, as we talked about this, I can't play it the same way. It's just like Moonlight Sonata. It's so soft and just so laid back, and depending on who plays it, it's the emotion comes out differently for every pianist. Claire de Lune and those really beautiful pieces. Well, so it's the same thing with this. Ba, 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 ba. So it depends on who plays it. And that's what's so great, because you can bring your own thing to it. So.
Now, your family though has made a pretty sizable impact on pop music in San Antonio as well. You played during the 60s and 70s. You played on probably organ and farfisa, on B3, on with so many rock groups.
One of the first bands I played with was Danny and the Dreamers. That's going back some time. And
then other members of your family involved in music as well, and the arts.
Yes, and my Uncle Rudy's daughter, Socorro, lives in North Carolina. She got her degree in visual arts and painting and, visual arts in general. And so she's an instructor at North Carolina and just does beautiful artwork. And so then I came along and I continued playing with everybody and composing and writing. And my brother Bubba's played with Brave Combo for 20 years, and they won a couple of Grammys. And he was composing in that band for years, and then after that band continued to compose with different solo albums that he has done. And then our older sisters, Rosario and Dolores, co-wrote with us songs that he recorded. And then Veronica, the youngest, is a filmmaker, and so there's a lot of it in the blood. So.
Well, I really welcome your visit here. The Hidden Histories Project, this is what it's all about. We're trying to uncover, but we haven't had a chance to hear your brother. And so do y'all have something that y'all might be able to pull off here?
He just drove in this morning, so
let's see what happens.
Okay.
Recuerdos gratos de ayer guardo en mi corazón con ternura sin igual, todo por ti, estos alientan mi ser. Los llevo a lidiar mi bien, pensando que siempre yo los adoré. Memories of yesterday I hold within my heart with enduring tenderness. Only for you, memories of time and space hold us deep within our warm embrace. On a star where you and I share loving grace. Y ahora van hacia ti de mí. Hacia ti, para que en silencio pienses que no hay de haber nadie en el mundo te quiera más. Recuerdos gratos de ayer guardo en mi con ternura sin igual, todo por ti, estos alientan mi ser y los llevo a lidiar mi bien, pensando que siempre yo
Thank you, Bubba. Thank you, Ricky. That's amazing. Now, this is the famous box that was in the closet at Cenobio's wife's house when he passed. And you can go through this box. It's about this deep with music. And then they found another case of music. And that had manuscripts by many of the West Side composers that lived in that same epoch. And we have, this is a major project to pursue. It is such an honor that this is here. You know, we talk about Pirates of the Caribbean looking for gold. We got it here, right here in this box right now. And I want to thank, this is really important. Now, over the next few months, we're going to continue the process. We will do it in February, and in February we're going to take a little spin to the modern, and we're going to be exploring the teenage rock clubs and party clubs of the 60s and 70s. And it was out of that world that Augie Meyer came out of, and Danny's group came out of. Patio Andaluz was one of the West Side clubs. Christopher Cross, Billy Gibbons, who later goes on to form ZZ Top. So we have a great curator, and she's the Michael Ann Coker, who is going to be dealing with the Tex Pop Museum, the Texas Popular Music Museum. And that will be the feature item on Hidden Histories in February. In March, Becky Barrera, who I mentioned earlier, will be the curator for high school kids who worked at Hemisphere. And so if people out there have pictures of their life at Hemisphere and things that happened there, please send stuff in. Our April event is one of our masterpiece collections, and that's Mega Corazon. We're going to do the poetry, performance poets of San Antonio live here in April. And we'll hold May and June in reserve for announcement a little bit later. But everything ramps up in May, June, and July. So thank you all very much. Ricky, you and your family are the hidden history of San Antonio.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for having us, George. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our live audience and our online audience for being here. Do not forget, find us at hiddenhistories.tv. And you can send ideas for shows, content. We'll call you anywhere in the world and talk to you if you have something about San Antonio. I talk too much, Ricky? Please
take us out.
Take us out.